keynote lecture of Focus 2018. It is not the final Focus event, as Brian Bono mentioned earlier this morning's lecture. Our Community of Learners lecture this week on Friday, right in this room at 10 a.m. will be delivered by Eric Beta in conjunction with Focus and Black History Month. So there's an opportunity for that. But also, it's not the final, maybe the final keynote presentation of our Focus series today, but we hope that the conversations that you've had today throughout this week are conversations and discussions that will continue. One of the advantages of being at a small, private, Christian liberal arts college is that you have the opportunity when you sit in a professor's focus talk and they say something that you disagree with or something that challenges you, you have the opportunity to go and speak with that professor as they're a part of our community and have that conversation throughout the semester, throughout your time at Spring University. So we're pleased to have Dr. Vincent Bacote here for 2 keynote lectures earlier this morning and this afternoon, speaking on our theme, America the Beautiful. And as I said in the opening of most of our keynotes, we have a question mark after the phrase America the Beautiful, and we have an exclamation mark. And that's intentional, because we want to pose the question of what does it mean to be a Christian and a citizen? And how can we be proud of our accomplishments as a nation, but still be humble about sometimes the messy reality that we're faced with in contemporary society here in the United States. So we're pleased to have Vincent Bacote again to give this afternoon's lecture. He's a theology professor at Wheaton College, the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics. He's written a book on called The Political Disciple, and I think the title of your talk this morning is The Making America Beautiful Through Public Faithfulness. Thank you. So please welcome Dr. Vincent Bacote.
Good afternoon. So I hope that you will be willing to ask questions when I'm done. I think that's one of the ways to make the most of our time together. So I really want to invite that and make sure I leave time for that. So I will do my best to not be one of those situations where I take up all the question time because of what I'm saying during the lecture. So, Making America Beautiful Through Public Faithfulness. I believe in America. That is the opening line in The Godfather. And this line is stated by an undertaker named Buonasera. Buonasera is an immigrant who has come to the United States, and he's made an honest living for himself. And he goes on talking about how he and his wife came to America. He's had a nice business, and America's been good to him. The immigrant experience has been good. But then he begins to talk about his daughter being assaulted by 2 young men. And then, because the young men got arrested, but then they were given a suspended sentence. And he said, suspended sentence? I told my wife, for justice, we must go to Don Corleone. And of course, Don Corleone is also Italian, but he's the Godfather. He's a mobster. And he's someone who's also come from Italy, but he's made his life come outside the system. It's another place where you have justice, another way for making a life for yourself and trying to have the things that America offers, even when it's not giving it to you through the means it's supposed to. So why talk about that opening illustration? It's for this reason. It's occurred to me, probably in the last year or two, that when people are complaining about things in the United States, about whatever it is that goes wrong, whether it's about the economy, whether it's about education, whether it's about healthcare, I mean, you fill in the blank, whatever it is, a lot of times when people are complaining about those things, what is underneath that complaint is that all those people believe that because they are in the United States of America, and America makes certain promises to them, then they ought to be having a certain kind of life in the United States of America. And because they're not having that kind of life in the United States of America, they are going to agitate about it. Now, they agitate about it in various ways. Sometimes what people do is they look for other people to blame. So they or them become the people who are the reason why what is owed to them, to this person who's speaking, what's owed to them in the United States of America, they can't get it because these other people are taking it away. That's sometimes what happens. Or other times it's just certain things that seem to have gone wrong with the system. The point is this. People in the United States of America believe that the United States is offering them a particular kind of life. And when they are not getting what is promised, then they believe that they have a right to agitate. It's like if someone makes you a promise, and then you discover that they were not so good on delivering that promise. Some of you, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the person who made you that promise and say, what gives? You made a promise. You said that this is what was going to happen, and it's not what happened. And you're very upset about it. Well, there are a lot of people who are upset in the United States right now. And I would argue that the main reason they're upset is because they believe that in the United States their life ought to be a particular way. They can't speak for what their life ought to be in some other countries, because I guarantee you, if you're in Saudi Arabia, you're in North Korea, you're in Myanmar, you're not making complaints like people do in the United States of America because you don't think that the country owes you a particular kind of life, or the country is making particular promises to you, that if you're here, you're going to have X kind of life. For the United States, we do believe it. The United States has made promises. This is why everybody comes. It's the greatest country in the world. All those types of things. And so people are agitated because it's as if they're saying, but you made a promise to me. You've got these documents that talk about equality, and there's all this rhetoric about the life that people can have if they just do the right things. And there are all these people who say, but I did the right things, or I tried to do the right things, and America hasn't delivered. So we have a lot of people complaining because they think America hasn't delivered what it promises. Whatever dream America seems to have offered them seems to, in some cases, have become a nightmare, or at least a dream where somebody in the middle of it changed the rules of the game. People say, I want the original rules of the game. What is a Christian to do? What do you do when your country lets you down? As I said earlier this morning, we are in a time of agitation, distress, confusion. Not the only time in the history of the United States where there's been agitation, distress, and confusion. There have been a lot of times like this. But we're in another one of those times. And for certain, there is lots of confusion among Christians about how to navigate this. And, I'm one of these people who is not ashamed to use the word evangelical Christian to describe himself. I know it's become a cottage industry to abandon the word and to problematize the word and every day there's somebody writing something about evangelicals. And there are people who change the names of things and drop the evangelical word, etc. I'm not one of those people. I'm happy to keep working. I'm happy to talk about that during the Q&A. But I say that in part because one of the questions that one asks about Christians, what at least for me as an evangelical Christian, how do you think about all of this? Well, to think about all this, I want to take a few moments to talk about how we got here, how evangelicals got here. So I'm going to do a small version of, because this can be several lectures what I'm about to talk about, a small version of how we got here in terms of evangelical Christians and their public engagement with America. And so the short version begins with, you're timing me, because John Harper and I talked about this. I told him that I could do it in 7 minutes, but I'd probably do it in 10. So we're going to see what time it says. All right, so here goes. So it begins with this. There once was a time when the word fundamentalist was not a pejorative, when it did not mean militant, anti-intellectual person who thinks they're right and everybody's doing the hell in a handbasket. There was a time when what it meant was simply people who believe what things that are fundamental or basic to the faith, about the truth of the Bible, about the incarnation of Jesus, about his saving life and atoning death and resurrection, about the fact that he was born of a virgin, about these kinds of things, right? These fundamental beliefs. So between 1910 and 1917, I believe it is, you have a series of pamphlets produced called The Fundamentals that are just about these fundamental beliefs. And the thing about these fundamentals, the unique thing is that people who use this word are people who have an intersection around those fundamentals, though they have differences about other things. In other words, they would never agree about baptism. They would never agree about the Lord's Supper. They probably don't even completely agree about the details of the end of the story when it comes to eschatology, but they do agree about these fundamentals. Hence, it is a cross-denominational reality that's being described when we talk about fundamentalists. So the fundamentalists, at first, are just people who believe the fundamentals. In the 1920s, there's something called the fundamentalist modernist controversy. In this controversy, what we now call mainline denominations, there's a controversy about who is going to be in control of the seminaries and in control of the most influential pulpits. Is it going to be the modernists who raise questions about those fundamentals, about whether that's the way we should talk about faith, or the fundamentalists? Well, surprise, surprise, the fundamentalists lose is what they do. And what many fundamentalists do after 1929 is they circle the wagons. And for some of them, they make separation from society an essential dimension of being a fundamentalist. So come out from them and be separate, says the Lord, touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. This is what they say is part of truly being a fundamentalist. So they become separatists. And they build their own world. Their own schools, their own institutions, radio stations, communications, all of those types of things. Now here's the thing. That means they withdraw from engaging society, but doesn't mean that they don't vote. It does mean they would never run for office. Don't get involved in the mess of all that worldly stuff, but be a patriot. Be a patriot. So, you have many of these fundamentalists who withdraw. Fast forward into the early 1940s, and you have figures like a guy named Carl John Ockenga and Carl F. H. Henry, who are definitely fundamentalists in belief, and they decide they're not so keen on all this withdrawal. And they do things like go to places like Harvard to get a PhD. This is scandalous for the fundamentalists I was just describing, okay? You would never do that. So they go. In fact, Henry, he apparently had a thing for doctoral education because he had 2 PhDs. But Henry and others, they are the people that we now call evangelicals, who are basically fundamentalists who want to become a little more culturally and a lot more intellectually engaged. So you get people like Henry, Ockenga, you get a figure like Billy Graham, who becomes this huge public figure, this person that many people trust, this evangelist who believes the fundamentals, but who's definitely more generous toward those outside of the fundamentalist evangelical world than the typical fundamentalist is. And Henry and Graham are also instrumental in the founding of a sort of signal magazine identified with the emergence of evangelicalism, the magazine Christianity Today. An important book that gets written, 1947, Carl F. Henry writes a book called The Uneasy Social Conscience of Modern Fundamentalism. It's well known because there he's criticizing fundamentalists for not only circling the wagons and withdrawing from society, but also for basically not doing what Scripture says when it comes to basically caring about those who are poor and needy and in distress. So here's the thing. The book is notable because Henry wrote it. It is not notable because it was persuasive. Because it was not persuasive. It's known now. It persuades some now. But but it didn't persuade a whole lot of people then. So it's notable because he talked about it. It's not notable because it made a big splash. That's really important, but it's notable because of what he said. So, fast forward into the 1960s, and here's part of what's going on. So, the people that are evangelicals, who are fundamentalists, who are now a little bit more engaged, they're still not really all that politically engaged. I mean, they care about society getting better, but the only way that they really think about that happening is through a kind of trickle-down theory where you convert enough people, and you have enough converted people in society, then what happens is society will get better. So that's still not a way where you're talking about getting involved in the structure of society, systems of politics and cultural transformation, etc. Well, you begin to get some court decisions in the 1960s and into the early 70s where people begin to not be able to avoid being involved in politics. So I'll note two of them. So you get the decision about taking prayer out of schools. So that makes a lot of sense. In fact, they're relatives of mine, I mean, who probably would never even think about the word fundamentals. I say, when do you think society started to go to hell? Well, when they took prayer out of schools. So I've had many relatives tell me this, right? The decision that actually catalyzes evangelicals getting into politics is not Roe versus Wade. It's the decision that says that Bob Jones University loses its tax-exempt status because of its policy about interracial dating. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So people are like, well, we've got to start getting involved in this politics. That's like around 1972. So certainly Roe versus Wade is a decision that plays a role, but it's not really until after 76 where it's really about abortion, sort of this signal issue that's bringing some evangelicals into politics. Because there's still a lot of them that think you shouldn't be involved in politics. That's too worldly. Some of the fundamentalists who believe that, but there are evangelicals who believe that. Interesting about 1976. Who gets elected in 1976? Jimmy Carter. When people are interviewing Jimmy Carter, he says things like, I'm born again. People are like, born again? What's up with born again business? So people start spending a lot of time thinking about who are all these born again people. So much so that Time and Newsweek called 1976 the year of the evangelical. Now, remember, Carter's a Democrat, who's saying, not a problem at that point. It eventually becomes a problem. So a lot of the people that were excited about supporting Carter did not maintain their enthusiasm by the time 1980 rolled around. And a lot of those evangelicals who liked Carter, they unhitched their wagon from Democrats and went over to Reagan, who didn't actually articulate the faith anywhere nearly as clearly as Carter did, but he said enough of the right things that those people cared about, so they wanted to get behind him instead of getting behind Carter. What also happens around 1979 is the emergence of what's called the moral majority, which is interesting because it's founded by a fundamentalist. Jerry Falwell is a fundamentalist, all right? It's not until the late 90s where he begins to try to use the word evangelical to talk about himself. So it makes him a peculiar fundamentalist, because the moral majority was very much about political action. In the middle of the 1980s, 1984 election, Pat Robertson runs for president. It's not successful, but he runs. All right, Jesse Jackson also runs for president, by the way, which is also interesting. So here's the thing, though. Even though all that happens, none of the, let me rephrase it this way. None of that happens, that doesn't mean that we should think that now all evangelicals think it's a great idea to be politically engaged. There's still many people who go, I just don't like this politics stuff. I don't think we should be doing that. I think we're off mission if we're doing that. I think we're not committed to the gospel if we're doing that. So there's no consensus that even evangelicals should be politically involved, but there's more of them that are. It's really not, I believe, until the late 90s, around 1998, when you begin to get anything like a consensus that evangelicals think that political engagement ought to be characteristic of our engagement with the world, our facing of the world. And so, by the time that George W. Bush gets elected, there are evangelicals all over the place who never said anything about this, saying, yes, we should be involved in politics. Yes, we should be involved in Hollywood. Let's get involved and engage the world. It's proper to us. George W. Bush gets elected. He has a lot of people, such as Michael Gerson, working for him at the White House. The media begins to pay a lot of attention to evangelicals. They don't do a great job of interviewing the right kind of people. Instead of interviewing people like Mark Knoll, they interview people like Joel Osteen. I don't know how Joel Osteen does anybody with that evangelical, but they ask. So, it's true, just check it out. But the point is that you've got people who are more interested in being involved, but by 2008, they've got buyer's remorse. And they got buyer's remorse for a couple of reasons. One, the Iraq war happened, and that exhausts a lot of people. But then also, with this engagement, you don't have people then getting the change that they thought would happen now they've all gotten engaged. Right? To which I say about that, what do you know about how most political change actually happens? Because most political change doesn't usually happen in 4 years or 8 years. It's a very long game. It's a very long game. But people were beginning to have buyer's remorse about that. By 2012, there's a further kind of confusion about that because people are not only sure whether a change can happen, people start to have suspicions that aren't the elections being purchased by these big billion-dollar-led PACs, etc. To which I say they're taxing the left and the right. Somebody's going to lose. So it can't just be about PACs buying elections. And then there's the fact that there is something that actually happens if lots of people go to vote. You can't buy that, right? So I always thought that was a problem, but a lot of people did say that. Well, now it comes to 2016, and what happens here? Well, two things I think to note about the election. Number one is many evangelicals, these white evangelicals, have been told since 1992 that Hillary Clinton was, to put it mildly, a devil. So, because they were told that, and no matter what they may have thought about her, the idea of voting for her, I mean, this would basically take a divine visitation, where someone would show up and say, you know, you must vote for her. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So you get that combined with, you have 19 people running for the Republican nomination. It's crazy, right? You had these, you had like the A League debate and the B League debate, right? Do you remember all that? And very few people moved from the B League to the A League. And Trump made it all about himself. He was very savvy, knows how to use media. But here's what he does that's very different from what Hillary Clinton does. He directly goes to evangelicals and asks them what they want. So he asks, so there's a bunch of different people. I ask, what do you want? He goes, okay, I'll give it to you. So he says, whatever you want. You may hate me, you may think I'm a horrible person, but I'll give you what you want. Hillary Clinton's campaign ignores religious people. As my colleague, my friend Michael Weir says, who worked in the Obama White House, you couldn't even find on Hillary Clinton's website a place for people of faith to look about their concerns. So that creates a problem if you want evangelicals to be voting for her, because basically there are people in her campaign that said they want a post-Christian campaign. Because they needed evangelicals. It wasn't until a couple of months before her election where people began to say, maybe we should talk to these religious people. It's too late, though. So, it's not a surprise that there are people, no matter what they think about Donald Trump as a person, he is basically the only person that they would vote for. Now, I'm not saying that validates that or whatever. I'm just saying that that's just a point of observation. And since then, he's to a degree delivered on those promises. You may think everything else is a train wreck, but there are other people who think he gave us the Supreme Court. He's at least pushing back against Obergefell, it seems. Not so much about the funding of Planned Parenthood, because that just got funded, completely. But there are things that people say, look, he's done more for us than any of these other people. So the political transactionism is enough. And it seems to me that people are willing to say, I know all that stuff we said about character mattering. Can we just table that for a while? Because what matters right now is he's for us. So that brings us to now, because with him getting elected, a lot of people are in crisis about what to think. Do I have a political home? Should I be engaged at all? I mean, is this all just a fruitless enterprise? I mean, who in the world expected this guy's a reality TV star with zero political experience to be president of the United States? Who in 2006 says, I'll tell you who wins the 2016 election, Donald Trump wins? Nobody says that, but that is where we are, right? And people want to know, what do you do about this? And of course, while social media is great for us, like connecting in lots of different ways, it's also great for people not learning how to actually engage each other. So people often what they do is they congregate in their silos with people like themselves, and then they flame people that aren't like them, is what they do, right? And evangelicals have done their share of this as well. And so you've got a very agitated environment right now. And I think a lot of people don't know what to do. They go, I don't know what to do about this political engagement. What do we do? Because it seems like, at least if you listen to certain media anyway, it seems like if you're an evangelical, you must be an apologist for a 3 times married, character-deficient president. I mean, that's basically what some people do. Now, I don't think that's true at all. But there are a lot of people who think that's what it entails. Well, so what do you do? What do you do? Because part of the reason Trump got elected is because he said to people, yes, you think things are being taken from you. And remember he said this 3 times during his acceptance speech at the Republican Party. I alone can do it, is what he said. Right? Well, and there are people who, they're like, well, at least he's willing to try. I don't know what, if you ask him a further question, do you think he'll actually do it? Do you know what he can do? No. But he actually said so. So people are willing to do that, right? Well, what's a Christian do amid all of that? Because some people then say, I've had it with all of this. I mean, we got in bed with politicians, and whether they're on the left or the right, they just ignore us, they don't really deliver for us. I mean, and even though Trump delivered a few things, I mean, wow, there's some of these negatives that go along with even getting too close to anything associated with the word Trump. What do I do? Well, so a few things that all happen to begin with the letter R. It just worked out that way when I was working on the outline, because I used to not be into alliteration at all. But now I'm okay with it. Before this, by the way. So, number 1, it begins with R. What do we do? Number 1, refuse to abandon the pursuit of public faithfulness. So what do I mean when I say public faithfulness? Number 1, what that means is seeking the good of the public near and the public far. In other words, worldwide, rooted in our ultimate fidelity to God. As I said this morning in chapel, it's always been our responsibility for engaging God's world. God has never vetoed that. And so we should always be participating as we can in God's world, seeking its best. That certainly includes political and public engagement. Sometimes the reason why Christians have a problem with this is because their theologies of creation and redemption wind up in tension with each other. So in other words, so what's redemption all about? Jesus is rescuing you, taking you out of his creation. So, to which I always go, it's kind of funny you think he's taking him out of his creation since he became incarnate in a body, which is what it means to be, like about as human as possible, and it's committed to the creation as possible. So he comes in a body, he dies in that body, and he's resurrected in the body. Remember, touch me, Thomas. All right? So that shows us that God has not abandoned his world. So if anyone ought to be publicly engaged, it ought to be those who actually really take the full-blown implications of the incarnation seriously. So refuse to abandon the pursuit of public faithfulness, and just because it gets difficult doesn't mean run for your lives. Okay? And let me just say this also about it, by the way. If you do abandon it, don't complain at what other people do because they stayed in the game. I mean, anybody wants to complain about what's happening in society, and you basically were part of a group of Christians that said we should stay out of politics. Yeah, but you told them to drive the bus. And now they took you to a stop that you don't like. You didn't want to have anything to do with the route. You wouldn't have anything to do with that bus. You said, I'll be in the back riding along, wake me up or something. Right? Okay? Don't complain if you check out. Because other people say, thank you. I'll be happy to check in. I'm happy to drive. But if we're going to drive, reckon with the fact that it's going to be a complicated engagement. It always is. That leads to my second point, which is resist misguided eschatological expectations. So remember, I said people complain because of something that they think is owed to them. Here's another reason people complain about almost everything I think. It's because they want what's called a realized eschatology, which means they want the full deliverance of the kingdom of God in their experience right now, usually according to their own specifications, of course. Right? And because God isn't delivering the realized eschatology that they want, well, they're just a little bit upset about that. So, theologians, when we talk about eschatology, the end of the story, we talk about what's called the now and the not yet. Well, when the not yet is magnified, or when it seems that the not yet has a loudspeaker, like going to a really loud concert, you're like, I'm tired of hearing all this not yet stuff. Please give me some now, thank you. And but because it's not being all now, they get frustrated. They get angry. They get agitated. And for some people, then they want to check out. So here's what I say. First of all, eschatology is why we have hope. If you believe in a resurrected Savior who is going to return, the fact that he's resurrected tells you that the kingdom that he announced, it is on the way, it is absolutely guaranteed, it's coming, all right? So an hourglass has been turned like this, and the sands are coming down. No matter what you're seeing around you, remember the sands are still going down in the hourglass, and God's eventually going to set this entire thing right. So you know the end of the story. Some of you probably like horror movies, but you only sort of like horror movies. So now with the ability to have your own ability to watch movies and to go to the end, so you like to go to the end first. So now, because you've seen the end, you're like, okay, now I can go back and watch the rest. And it's not so scary anymore because I know how the story is. Right? Well, this is basically how eschatology works in part. We know the end of the story. If you really know the end of the story, you should absolutely never be a hopeless person. You never should be. You should reckon with the fact that, yes, I feel hopeless. I feel desperate. It's true. But that's because you're looking primarily at circumstance and not looking at the end of the story. If you know the end of the story, you know that all those circumstances are temporary. Right? So the worst things are temporary. But something else is also temporary. So it should be clear that I think you should be participating in politics, right? So another way that the eschatology helps us, if we're resisting a realized eschatology, is we recognize that whatever we accomplish politically, culturally or otherwise, is always penultimate. Okay? It may be really not. It may make a great contribution. It may advance the common good in a significant way. It will not deliver the fullness of God's kingdom. It will be a coming attraction, perhaps, of that kingdom, but it's not delivering that kingdom. So the point is, get in the game of politics, but don't mistake your political action for the action that finally establishes God's kingdom. Why put all that weight on it? Right? Make your political action a response of hope, a response of faithfulness, but not something that you hope has to bring the kingdom, because if it doesn't, it's all going to collapse. That means somehow the final establishment of God's kingdom depends on our futile and frail effort. Ash Wednesday is a good day to talk about that because it's all about frailty. Right? So, our frail efforts are going to bring in the kingdom? No. God will finally establish that himself. In the meantime, we, as a form of witness, participate in politics leading to these penultimate acts. Set aside the temptation to be a Messiah. We've already got that. So you don't need one. Worship the one we have. Let your hope be based on the fact that he's coming again. And then pursue your public faithfulness in political action. Number 3, refuse to look away from the challenge of race. You know, people sometimes like to look at race, but they don't like to look at it long enough. I like what Brian Stevenson says, which is, well, we haven't even really begun to look at our past. If you're going to look at your past, here's an analogy for it. Has anybody here seen the film 12 Years a Slave? Anybody seen that? All right, I see a few hands. Okay, there's a scene in 12 Years a Slave called the whipping scene. It goes on for a long time. Basically, long enough that you want to run out of the theater. Right? Or if you're watching it on Netflix or whatever, you want to fast forward. Just get me out of it. Steve McQueen, the filmmaker, was asked, why did you do that? In certain other scenes. He says, because I don't want to let the audience off the hook. And the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons why we have challenges engaging race is because people let themselves off the hook all the time. Because they never really reckon with the absolute horror of the history of race. And please understand, it's horrible. You know, one of the things that I don't really like doing, right, is whenever PBS puts on Eyes on the Prize, I don't usually watch it. All right? It's about the civil rights movement, etc. You know why I don't like to watch Eyes on the Prize? Because it's like watching a horror movie. That's why. It's like, oh, it's terrible. That's terrible, okay? And here's the thing you have to understand. Have things changed? Yes. It's 2018. You're sitting here looking at an African American with a PhD in theology, and most of you aren't questioning, or maybe all of you aren't questioning, whether I did enough to deserve it, or whether somebody didn't give it to me and I didn't deserve it because I wasn't really smart enough, because nobody who looks like me could ever be smart enough that any of you would listen to anything I have to say about anything that matters. Right? That's a huge change. That's a huge change. It's a step. It's a step. Think about it this way. Arguably, slavery in the United States goes back to 1619. All right? Slavery ends in 1863, sort of, right? But then, surprise, surprise, a sort of reestablishment of that ethos called Jim Crow emerges not soon thereafter. That doesn't really end until 1964 and 65. All right? So I'm born in 1965. I'll be 53 if you're 53 years out of the entire history of the United States. Okay? That goes back to 1619. Now, chances are that some of you have issues you've had all your life, psychological issues, right? And maybe some of you, you had your issues for, like, let's say, 80% of your life, and maybe the last 20% everything's been okay, which means probably you're still dealing with what happened with that 80%. And if you talk to me about the stuff that happened over the 80%, and I told you to just get over it, you would probably think I was just a little bit insensitive. Don't you understand what happened to me? Don't you understand the ongoing effects of all that? How can you say that to me? Welcome to the history of the United States of America. Welcome to the effects of what happens when you build a society where for most of the history of the society, you traffic in human persons. And you dehumanize people that are non-white, and generally even white people who aren't at least middle class. And that's normative for what you do. Right? And yes, amid all that, at least since the mid-1700s, we've had rhetoric about things like equality. Right? But it's all an aspiration that remains aspiration. The point is this. Change is happening. Oh, a whole lot more change needs to come. Because all those things that happened leading before 1964 and 65, it affects every area of life. It affects politics, education, law, medicine. Just keep going. Keep going. You know? And the point then is you have to be willing to look at that. If anybody needs to look at that, it needs to be Christians. Why? Because basically what's happened around race in the modern West is a great way of violating the second greatest commandment about loving your neighbor. It's also actually violating the first commandment about having no other gods before me. It makes this mythical thing called whiteness a god. People may not think they worship it, okay? White nationalists worship it. Okay, we got that. Okay, set them aside, not including them, All right? There are other people that have worshipped it without having to think about it. All right? I mean, that's just the way it is. And please understand, this is not something for people, most of your wife, what I can tell. This is not something to get upset about. This is just something to reckon with because it's just the real. And it's real this way. Think about it this way. Who made the modern West? Who built it? It's Europeans. You think Europeans that built the modern West are just making it for everybody? What people group in the history of the world has made a society for everyone and not just their people? Who's done it? It doesn't exist. It's part of the mythology of what we have in the United States. We want that sometimes. Sometimes we don't always want it. Right? So my point is this. If the modern world is made that way, right? We just need to acknowledge that it's there and that tremendous horrors have ensued with that. And if anyone ought to say, wow, well, that's an example of how the doctrine of sin is more true than I could imagine, then Christians ought to be the people that name that and name all the ways that has worked out and all the ways that we still with the way that it happens and ways that we still deal with the effects of major actions that happen in life. And in the meantime, begin living together within the community of God in ways where we have the courage to actually talk about this. And here's the thing to understand, okay? Talk about it and don't try to figure it all out. This isn't about anybody having super competence about it. Because, none of us has complete competence about it. It's a really complicated thing. Right? And people have all different kinds of experiences. Sometimes, at least a week, people say, why do we have to keep talking about this? To which I say, do you know the experience of every single person on this campus? Because it seems like you think you do when you say that. When you think we don't have a problem about race. Because you talk to every single person, walk in their shoes, you know what they're dealing with. You have to be God to do that. Right? So yes, we need to talk about it. And if you want to complain about it being brought up, I've started saying this in recent years, take your complaint to the old country, to Europe, because that's where it got invented. That's who brought up race, the people who made it up. And don't blame the people that are dealing with the weight of it for trying to talk about basically trying to live a human life because of the fact that it dehumanized non-blacks. Don't tell them. You shouldn't be talking about this. That's like telling somebody who's got a pillow over their face because somebody's suffocating them. You really should stop trying to push that pillow off your face and just go ahead and suffocate. That's the way it works. So, Christians of all people need to have the courage to face the horror, reckon with the fact that, wow, this is overwhelming. It is. And then just begin to think in little ways about how to begin to live like neighbors with each other. It's not an easy thing to do, right? And of course, beyond that, certainly in terms of our political engagement, to ask, how do we really seek justice with all the ways that this has gone wrong? And knowing that no matter what public policy you come up with, it's not perfect. Okay? There's no silver bullet for addressing this. It's like, here's the policy, and now, voila, everybody has the America that they want. It's not there. It's not there. But there are things that we can do to address this to make it better. Please understand, when it comes to race, it touches everything. The problem with talking about that there are laws about equal opportunity is that there are a whole lot of assumptions about this. Right? Think about this. How many people actually know, one, to recognize an opportunity, and then once they do, what to do with an opportunity? Does everybody know how to do that? What does it take to recognize and do something with an opportunity of any kind? Right? You have to get educated to know how to see it. Educated to know how to take advantage of it. Some people are in terrible education systems. I mean, this is not just really a race issue, this is a class issue as well. I mean, so what I'd say is that, I mean, this is so multifaceted. It's a huge thing. So let's reckon with the fact that it's huge, but then say, okay, it's huge. That doesn't mean I need to now check out. I need to pause, exhale, and then, ask God to help me with what step do I take now? And in what way, in terms of my public faithfulness, do I try to help begin to move the needle a little bit now? I mean, this is not about trying to do something as a political superhero. I mean, I wish. But as I said earlier, the political process doesn't happen like that. It's generally a very long game. Public policy takes a long time. A long time for all that stuff to work out. So you have to stay involved in a lot of dimensions of politics that have nothing to do with great crisis experiences and everything to do with things that may seem really dry and mundane. But a lot of that dry and mundane stuff is part of what's involved in facilitating a better society. So we've got to be paying attention to those things, on race and other things. All right. I see it's 3 o'clock, by the way. Just want to know that. Number 4. Reckon with the reasons why some wish to step back or abandon politics. So I'm just going to mention 2, possibly 3. So number 1 is there have been a lot of conversation since Donald Trump has been elected about, I just see so many evangelicals that show that what they really care about is power. Now, it's possible that that's really true about some people. But here's what sometimes happens that follows that is, okay, so they're seeking power. So then the response is, so we really should just not be involved in politics because it's all about power. That's really not the way to go. Because the fact of the matter is, if you haven't read Andy Crouch's book about power, I strongly recommend reading it. It's a really good book. But power, is not necessarily your enemy. It's the abuse of power. So we have to learn how to steward power well. Otherwise, you're just taking another step to letting other people that you're going to complain about be involved in politics and be involved with decisions that affect all of us. And then you're like, I can't believe these people are doing this. It's like, well, you basically handed the whole board to them and said, it's yours. And I'll just deal with whatever you do with your power. So a temptation to power, or associated with the fact that corruption takes place in politics, is not sufficient reason to check out. Find me anything that's involved in human life where you can't, if you don't look, you have to look long, where you can't find corruption. It's everywhere. Corruption is not an excuse for checking out. It does mean that sometimes boys are going to have a lot of frustration. Boys are going to be more 2 steps back than 1 step forward. Sure. But the presence is needed for at least some people to be spending a lot of time in political engagement, trying to steward political life well so that there's a little less corruption and a little more things that emerge for the common good. So we can't let the fact that people misuse power, the fact that people are corrupt, be a reason for checking out. Because basically, if that's your excuse, check out of life. Seriously. Because every dimension of life, you'll find somebody who's living in a corrupted way. All right? The second thing is, some of you may be aware of this. Certainly the faculty members may be, and some of you students as well. About 8 years ago, there's a book that a lot of people spent a lot of time engaging by James Davison Hunter called To Change the World. And To Change the World, he talked about the idea of faithful presence. And part of the reason that he was talking about this is that he thought that evangelicals across the spectrum all tried to get social change to happen through the wrong means. And particularly, he thought that a lot of people, their approach to politics wound up being a way where they became too enamored of power, and also where they became people who, strangely, the last pages he really suggests this, that people, because they think they can change the world, the fact that they think that God says you should change the world, basically says that it excuses or it rubber stamps whatever strategy you already have for wanting to change the world. Which may include saying that if people aren't like you, that they're your enemies, and that you're the one that people are attacking, etc. And he didn't want that. So he proposed faithful presence, which is not a strategy of withdrawal. It's just a highly localized strategy. So that where you are, be like Jesus, love your neighbor, and try to make improvements where you are. So here's my problem with faithful presence. Faithful presence is great if you're middle class enough. If you're not, you don't have the luxury of faithful presence. Now, in some domains, faithful presence may be all you have for a while because the circumstances of your engagement only allow faithful presence. So okay, fine. But that's not all circumstances. And my problem with people excited about Hunter's book was, people who are in a crisis can't really afford faithful presence, which winds up in practice being like when all these well-intended people said to African Americans in the Civil Rights Movement, can you guys just wait a while? Can you go slower? Right? It's funny. Ask people to go slower while public lynchings are still okay. Isn't that a little bit strange? To ask people to go slower when actual lives are in danger? When people are being kept from the reality of, at least in the United States, this American dream, this American promise? When the government itself is an actor against certain people that are supposedly its citizens? And you want to tell people to just wait a while, right? Again, it's like me telling the person who's got the pillow on their face, just wait a while with that pillow on your face. I mean, you'll learn how to breathe a little bit like that. You'll feel like you're dying, but not really. Okay, to me, that's the problem with implications of faithful presence. I'd say faithful presence is a great place to start. It's nowhere to end. Nowhere to end, because there are too many crisis realities for many people in this country and beyond, and faithful presence is not sufficient to address those things. Now, that doesn't mean then that the things that concern Hunter you ignore. It means you demonstrate why you can seek the transformation of society without making a god of your approach to transformation. Without being succumbing, really, to the temptations of power, because some people do. Reckon with all of that. Why you still press forward towards greater transformation? Because you're really thinking about the good of all people. And when you think about all people, you know that not everybody has the time that faithful presence needs for change to happen. So, to me, that kind of stepping back, I understand why there's that concern, but it's a concern that seems to not recognize that there are people who exist besides people who are white and middle class. And there are a lot of them. So, if I'm thinking about all the people in the world, and I'm a Christian, and I'm loving my neighbor, I can't step back like this. The stakes are too high. Now, some people think the stakes are too high because of people getting corrupted by power, etc. I get it. To which I say this. Our reasons for doing anything should not primarily be determined by the dysfunctions of people, by dysfunctional ways that people practice things. Those are the things that warn us about how things can go wrong. And they help us to ask more and more, how do we do this right? More faithfully, better, while recognizing that whatever we do, as I said, is going to be a penultimate. So I think we can reckon with that. And at the end, I'll just say this as a phrase, we have to resolve to stay in the game no matter what. And the reason we have to stay in the game goes back to my first R, which is we have to be involved in public life. Period. Because God has always wanted his people to be engaged in his world, stewarding his world well. If you're stewarding his world well and you're in a country like the United States where citizens can actually become office holders, then there's opportunity in places like this for dimensions of public engagement that can have a lot of positive difference. Not always immediately, sometimes it may take 20 years, but the difference can be made. And I think the people of God have a tremendous opportunity right now to be those who stay in this game, who reckon with the difficulties, because it is a difficult thing, but they refuse to check out. And they say, I'm going to be here steady as Jesus. We do that. And I think we can make America beautiful. You can really make America great again. Because of public faithfulness, because of your service. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bacote. Maybe we can hashtag that, make America beautiful again. We have about 10 minutes or so for questions. I'll walk around the mic and try to catch your question for the recording.
Okay, while you're waiting for that, can I ask people a question? Does anybody know the name Phil Donahue? Does that mean anything to anybody? Anybody that's not under 40? Anybody that's not over 40? Okay, just curious. Because we talk walking around with Mike. Phil Donahue.
Yeah.
Talk show host. Okay.
Questions?
Is your question, could I do it in 5 minutes?
No, you didn't. There's really, there's about 4 questions in the history that I want to come back to. So I'm struck by the fact that back 3 years ago, the Public Religion Research Institute suggested they had data that identified the white evangelical bunch as disproportionately what Robbie Jones called the scouser.
Right.
And as you were talking about the transitions over time, including the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and Roe, and a whole bunch, where does that calling back to an earlier day when we didn't mess with this stuff, how does that fit with?
Well, I don't think that harkening back to an earlier day means a day where people aren't politically engaged. I think it's a desire for the dimensions of Judeo-Christian culture that where you could just assume that even though America isn't a Christian nation, right, that it is this nation with a soul church, like Chester said, and and that is this place that is less religiously pluralistic, or if it is religiously plural, that there's just not that much that's contested in terms of the influence of certain dimensions of Christian beliefs in terms of how they influence our public perception. I mean, the problem is that, look, once you check out in the 30s, the other people begin to redirect things. And it took time before their way of looking at the world became, whether it's part of the secularization thesis or whether it's just, ways that liberal Christianity permeated sort of, the larger public narrative. I mean, those things took time, but when you let other people do it, I mean, I think that's what's going to happen. I also think, by the way, that some people might say, well, we got pushed out, etc. No one told fundamentalists to stop being politically engaged. I mean, William James Bryant, who was a fundamentalist, he ran for president. Right? Yeah, right. So it's actually a very interesting thing that happens. Arguably, you could also say that a factor in that is the cross-denominational presence and dominance of dispensational eschatology. Okay, just show of hands. If I say dispensational eschatology, who knows what I'm talking about? Sorry. You're all looking at me like, dude, I don't even know what you're talking about. Okay. How many of you have heard of the Left Behind series, those books? Okay, we've got like a third. All right. How many of you heard of the term rapture? About the, okay, all right, there we go. All right. Think a theology where Jesus could return at any minute, hence the rapture, and the Christians will be taken away, right, for 7 years in this tribulation and then Jesus return. Okay? That's dispensational eschatology. Dispensationalism is a movement about how you look at tell the whole story of Christianity, of the Bible actually. It was the dominant theological frame within evangelicalism for most of the 20th century. And it had a view that had a negative interpretation of history. So things are getting worse and worse, and then Jesus will rapture us out. If that's what you're thinking, then you're going to disengage. While wanting still to have, the nice parts of Christian influence in society. While on the other hand, it's going to get worse and worse, and then the rapture will come. So I think that's also a factor because what that led some people to do is say, when it comes to all these political engagements that I'm talking about, why are you polishing the rails on the Titanic, right? Why are you moving the deck chairs when the ship is sinking, et cetera, et cetera? And for many people, that was very persuasive. So your energies would not be primarily directed towards anything that's improving society. So I think that's also a factor in people stepping away because, Jesus could come back tomorrow. What's most important? It's not that stuff. So I think that also plays.
Other questions? I'm going to leave the faculty corner just for a second to see if there's a student that has a question, and we'll come back to what they say.
Hi. So when we engage in politics, obviously in our country, we can't just think about Christians, like we can think about everyone. How do we go about that ethically without imposing our values on every
Sure.
Sure.
First, I strongly recommend a brief article written by Jonathan Chaplin, is his name, Chaplin. You can look up what's called the Public Justice Review, where his article came out last week. The Public Justice Review is a publication put out by the Center for Public Justice. Great organization, cpjustice.org. Definitely a great place to be thinking about faith and politics. So I strongly recommend checking it out. But John Chaplin, Chaplin, because in that article he's talking about that pluralism, right? So inhabiting a pluralistic world doesn't mean that you don't have reasons that you think are persuasive for how, when it comes to public policy, ways that your beliefs lead to certain policies, that those are good not just for your people, but that they're good for everyone, right? Because there is no policy that emerges out of a vacuum. It all comes out of some set of ideas, right? And of course, there are few public policies that directly emerge from book, chapter, and verse of Scripture, right? They're all things that eventually emerge from a series of steps from Christian affirmations to things that would be public policy. So in a country like the United States, this is a country where we do not have a state church, right? So, but we are a country that has freedom of, not from, right? So people are allowed to exercise their religion. The point of our freedom of religion is not closeted religion, right? The point is that the government does not favor any particular denomination, right? That's the point. When it comes to public policies, the question is, everybody, we're thinking about some problems. Public policies are addressing some problems, some need. People are asking, how do we address this for all of us? So you try to think about all the things involved, and then how you are going to draft something that's going to pass, that's going to get implemented, that will hopefully lead to the good of all people, right? And will lead to greater flourishing in society. So arguably, what you want to try to do is to, you have to work with other people, and you want to try to persuade them of why these policies are helpful. So, when people say you can't legislate morality, etc., that sounds great if you don't think about the fact that everyone has a morality, and that every policy has a morality behind it. Are there any immoral policies? I mean, are there policies that don't think they have something to do with the good of society? I mean, why would you even have the policies if you're not thinking about the good of society, right? Well, there's some conception of the good. It comes from somewhere, right? So everyone is legislating morality in some way. The question is, you know, how are you thinking through a pluralistic society doing that in a way where you're not requiring people to believe what you believe religiously, right? And, you know, I think when it comes to, let's say, you know, something like abortion or questions about sexuality, etc. I mean, the arguments, the best ones have been about ways that you're talking about how there are larger effects of those policies that lead to other things that destabilize society. I mean, that's sort of the argument, right, that happens. Now, gay marriage is legal. That's probably not going anywhere, right? So now the question for Christians is how do you live in a society where some people want to use their power with the fundamentalism of the left to really squelch, like, religious practice in public. Not in terms of you can't worship, but in terms of policies that governments, in terms of businesses, where religious expression needs to be closeted. I mean, you know, you have to be participating in that society. You know, there was a big fear that a congressman in California was going to have a policy that was basically going to say schools that have policies that with a sexual ethic, you were going to possibly lose government funding if you had that policy, right? So here's what happened. He was largely thinking about white evangelicals. Well, a bunch of African American pastors bust a whole bunch of people at the Sacramento and said, if you do that, you damage the opportunity for our children to attend those schools, right? Nobody's talking about that policy right? The point is that it wasn't just about white evangelicals, it turned out, right? It's about other religious people who said, hey, we need that money. And some of us, we want to send our kids to those schools. And if you say that those schools can't get those kinds of funding related to some of your financial aid, our kids can't get those schools. So we need that funding. So, I mean, he backed off, right? Because he saw that it wasn't just this monolithic group of people that he thought had a policy that was only about oppressing a certain group of people. You saw, hey, this other group of people, there's also a minority group, boy, they care about all this. And they're really concerned about your policy. So you had a coalition that built that people just weren't thinking about. All right? I mean, so the narrative wasn't just a narrative about what middle class white evangelicals. It was about, hey, this actually affects more than those people. And then something changed, right? So those schools still have their policies, and you know they're getting that funding. So I use that as an example to say that you know the way that some evangelicals have done politics, they wouldn't have thought about needing these other people, right? So that's something that needs to change. Is to recognize that wow, it's not just about my sliver of people. It's about even other people who believe the same things that I do. They may not agree with me on all public policies, but there are probably more things that we share than we recognize because we actually haven't given it the time of day. Time to give it the time. So that's another dimension of it that I think has to be recognized, which is the diversity itself within or under the larger tent of people who actually have those adjustable beliefs. Because I think that also alters the equation about how that goes forward in our society. That's another dimension of it. Is that? I mean, it's a long conversation, right? But so also look up something called principal pluralism, which the Jonathan Chapman article we're talking about. And then there's a guy named John Inazu, I-N-A-Z-U, who's written a book called Confident Pluralism, which isn't the same as public pluralism, but he's still also talking about a way that we make space in society for people to hold their views, practice their views, and pursue public policy out of those views. So, I-N-A-Z-U.
Okay, thank you. I would like to come back to the question of the word evangelical, and especially after the translation.
Yeah, sure.
And I share your view about what an evangelical truly is. But I'm still wondering about continuing to use the word in a context in which it may have come to mean something other.
Sure.
I am among those who actually even wonder, should I continue to classify myself as an evangelical
Yes.
after 2016 election?
Yes.
And the reason is simply that, yes, we may explain the Trump victory because of the two opponents choosing between Hillary and Trump, so the evangelicals went with Trump because of what he promised. I understand that and I agree with that. But for me, what I would call the scandal of the evangelical report in 2016 is not with the general election. It is the primaries. Because Trump still won because of evangelical support against, in my view, far more qualified for evangelical candidates.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that's what makes me wonder, is there a deeper issue about what it means to be an evangelical? Going back to the fundamentalist and modernist era debate, didn't the term evangelical itself come to be when former fundamentalists realized that the label was misused, so they came to be identified as evangelicals to remedy this problem?
Yes, some of them, although Carl F. H. Henry always called himself a fundamentalist. I remember he gave a lecture when I was in seminary. I remember thinking, every time he said fundamentalist, I wanted to say, you mean evangelical, right? Seriously. So thanks for that. What I would say is I agree that it's problematized, right? But because there's a difference between fundamentalist and evangelical. The root word of evangelical is gospel, right? As John Perkins said in the conversation there at campus about this, I have a vested interest in a term, the gospel, actually being more advocated for because of its connection with the gospel rather than people misusing it because of their creative explanations about supporting presidents that whose behavior they never would have supported 20 years ago, etc. So that's part of it. Part of it's also the fact that when you talk going back through its history, I mean, there are people who are saying, well, evangelicalism has always been implicated in whiteness, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, I'm fine talking about the fact that it's not just about belief, that it's also about culture and context. I think that's really important. Black evangelicals don't have to be aware of the fact that, that you're contextualized, by the way. So I think that awareness has to be made for people. But I think the term remains useful because, one, it's not just in the United States where people are using it, right? And generally, it's to these people who are committed to the gospel. To me, that's the biggest thing about it. Now, I will say this. I'm fine saying that there might be context where that it is just introducing toxicity in the room to use the word evangelical. Okay, and the conversation's over before it gets started. All right? If you know that is that kind of situation where you lose social capital immediately because you use that word, Jesus follower, committed Christian, whatever, right? Fine. I'm fine with doing that. But I don't think that it's a term to set aside at all times. So I think, and honestly, I think reckoning with the fact that there are people who hold the term whose lives reveal that they're in ever more need for that gospel is not, shouldn't be a surprise. Only if I have the idea that if I'm an evangelical, then of course it means a certain kind of perfection of belief and practice. Then, get rid of this thing because, stuff's all over the place, right? But if I really reckon with the fact that these are people who also can actually need to continue in some ways to be converted, I think it can be helpful. One thing I like to say about evangelicals, and I know it's a tricky thing, it takes work to do this, but what you can always do with evangelicals is take a Bible and say, hey, let's talk about this book. Let's talk about this book talks about. And let's just spend some time talking about the book and what you believe about this book and what your life should be, what my life should be, because we believe this book. In other words, you can always put a Bible in front of the face of an evangelical because they're really committed to it. And at some point, they've got to acknowledge that maybe there are ways that they have read it or haven't read it at all. That it's like, oh, I didn't notice that. But I'm committed to what it says, and I trust this is the Word of God. So, you can always have that wedge, so to speak, I think, with evangelicals about this. You can't necessarily say that, I think, with some other traditions. So, to me, that's why I think it's worth holding on to. It doesn't mean you have to always say it. But I do think that it's worth saying some of the time. And I think, and by the way, I definitely think it's worth regaining from Jeffrey, Swalwell, etc. Because, I mean, think about this, all right? The people that they keep talking about, I mean, okay, since when has Jim Baker been influential for anybody since the fall of PTL? Okay? Paula White still is largely somebody who is within a certain sector of Pentecostal and charismatic settings. Same thing with the Copelands. Robert Jeffress, when has Robert Jeffress ever been the big leader in evangelicalism? How about never? I mean, he has a bigger profile than he's ever had because he was an early supporter of the president, not because of his influence over evangelicals, right? So, and same thing with Falwell Jr. It's like, nowhere near the influence of that, right? So, about Franklin Graham Jr., well, he doesn't have the influence his dad has. I mean, he does have a footprint, but he seems to keep saying things that just make people have question marks. It's like, you honestly, it's like, can somebody give him a publicist? I mean, that's, seriously, Cameron's gonna say that? But seriously, I think that's something that we have to reckon with. Because sometimes the way people react to this is that all these people that are identifying as evangelicals, because they're the ones that most evangelicals have been listening to. They're not. They're people that are getting attention because of their relationship to the president, not because of their significant influence over the broader swath of evangelicals. So I think that that's another reason why I think if we're saying, hey, let's just talk about whether these people have ever been the ones that have been most influential. Because they haven't. They are prominent, but not dominant in any way.
By the way, I came to the conclusion that it should be a claim, not a number.
I like that. Yes. It's like jazz. Right. Well, some say about jazz anyway, right?
Dr. Bacote, thank you for being with us today.
It's great to be here.
And challenging our campus community with your words this afternoon and this morning. Just a reminder to all of you, this is not our last focus event, our community learners event on Friday morning in this room at 10 a.m. with Eric Beta. If you have questions, I'm sure Dr. Bacote is willing to stick around for a couple minutes. And
Happy to do so.
So thank you so much.